We have these two men in the room. They've been doing lots of work for in the last few years on a project that we're kind of all keen on, and we have an opportunity to grill them. And that's what we shall do. So have a think, and we're really going to just drive it from the audience and just do a long Q&A. So.
I'll talk about privacy, because people always tell me that, like, I don't care about privacy, and that's not actually true. I do care about privacy. Tell me that too. I know how hard a problem it is. So I'm supposed to repeat the question. So the question was about other kind of current challenges, in addition to scalability, which I talk about, which were privacy and instant confirmations. Thank you very much. My brain is always thinking through the privacy thing. So if you look at the academic literature, there's kind of two groups of academics. And you know, every like financial crypto conference, you see papers on de-anonymizing Bitcoin. And then you see papers on making Bitcoin transactions more anonymous. And so it kind of feels like this constant battle between these two kind of research groups, finding increasingly clever ways to kind of tease out who's doing what, and then increasingly clever ways of hiding, you know, who's doing what. I have no idea where that battle will end up, and I actually think that it's a little premature to kind of pick a winner and say that, you know, this is going to be the solution that's going to solve everybody's privacy problems, and we're just going to hard code it in the protocol, and that's going to be done. All of the academic researchers who are kind of increasing privacy, they don't, so far, I haven't seen anything that requires changes to the protocol besides these really advanced ideas like zero cash. And there is a project to make zero cash a reality. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about that, so I'm not going to say more about that. But if that is successful and actually efficient enough, you know, that may be the solution. But I think it's a tricky problem, and it's like, in my head, kind of privacy is an unsolved problem. And privacy on the internet in general, I think, is an unsolved problem. I think a lot of people thought it was solved with Tor. And recently that's kind of come up for question, that we think maybe, you know, even using Tor is not enough against the NSA, against an attacker who can insert their tentacles into data centers all over the world. So those are my thoughts on privacy.
Yeah, okay. So I get told I don't care about privacy as well. It's not quite true. It's more like some people only care about privacy, and that's the thing that they care about in Bitcoin, and they don't care about anything else. And then, yeah, guys like me and Gavin, we have to worry about like usability and performance and scalability, and I think a lot about like smart contracts and so on, because I think, you know, Bitcoin's success is, you know, it may not be about making payments from A to B necessarily, but maybe these more advanced things as well. So it's not that we don't care about privacy. It's more that it's not necessarily the top priority all the time. It's not the only priority, right? And for some people it is, and then they tend to get like really mad at us and be like, how dare you, you know, be a traitor to the cause or whatever. Like, I don't care. Instant confirmations, right? So I actually wrote an article on this, so you can read that if you like. If you can't, if you search for my name followed by like double spending in Bitcoin, you should find it. And if you can't find it, email me and I'll send you the link. But to summarize briefly, there are lots and lots of ideas for things we can do. It is not clear that we have to do anything, because it's not clear that Bitcoin is inadequate, right? A lot of people sort of say the sky is falling, Bitcoin can never work, whatever. But, you know, I pay for things with Bitcoin in shops pretty frequently, actually, and it works, you know. Currently, we're not losing merchants due to double spending. So my preference is always to try and reinforce the current system and the blockchain and the current protocols, because that's what's implemented by lots of people at this point. If we go to some other more complicated idea, then suddenly everyone has to write new code, and we throw out the blockchain. Well, we don't throw it out, but, you know, it's not the main thing anymore. So yeah, I don't know. My plan is to sort of ignore the problem until merchants are screaming, and then, you know, try and figure out ways to make the current Bitcoin protocol incrementally better. Probably through risk analysis. I have a background in risk analysis. It's one of the things I worked on at Google, so I know what you can do with it, and it can be very effective. Right? It's kept the credit card system alive for many years, so that's sort of my inclination there. Does that answer your question? Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay. Is Patrick here? Patrick. He's our lawyer. I can refer you to a good lawyer too. There's one. No, I don't know. You don't know. Well, how should we know? I think judges apply common sense. No, I don't think so. Are there any cases?
Oh, right. So the question was about smart contracts and whether, like, if you had a smart contract involving ownership of a car, maybe partial ownership of a car, and something went wrong, like, how would a court, is there any precedent for, like, how a court would even approach it? Is that the question? Yeah. Has anyone been done exploring? I think the answer is no, and Patrick can nod his head maybe. So Patrick thinks it's not a problem, and the courts would probably come to a reasonable, like, answer that you would probably expect. Courts are always absolutely, and politicians too. They're always absolutely 100% reasonable.
There's some case law about virtual goods, like Second Life and, Right. So that would probably be the closest bit.
World of Warcraft items and things.
Yeah, courts are starting to deal with the internet.
Can I just ask if you've thought of any alternative mechanisms for funding Bitcoin core dev outside the foundation, just sort of directly, basically, for us to be able to contribute to core dev without intermediaries, etc.
So the question was if I'd thought about any ways of funding quote-unquote core dev directly. And the answer is yes. You always end up with who controls the money, who decides where it goes. I don't want that guy to be me. Because one of the ways to kill an open source software project is to, again, have hierarchy, have somebody at the top who's kind of anointing, you deserve money for this, you deserve money for, but you I don't like. And so you're not going to get any money. And money is a really good way of just destroying a project. People get jealous. People have weird little switches in their head once money becomes involved. This fun project that you worked on, suddenly, why did he get paid for that and I'm not getting paid for this? They must not value privacy or whatever, right? So I don't know how to crowdfund and get around that problem. I mean, you could do something like, crowdfund, and then there's some voting procedure that decides who gets paid, maybe. But Sybil attack, and there are all sorts of. Again, when I think about innovating, that's not a place where I particularly want to spend a lot of effort trying to innovate. I think that, again, that's a lesson that we should have learn from the foundation is pick your battles, and I think other open source projects that we would use as role models. I think there are kind of well-worn paths for how do you create sustainable funding models, and usually that's a very diverse set of ways that the different people involved in the project get funded. And so some of them work at companies, some of them maybe work at nonprofits, some of them are volunteers. And I think that's the way forward. And if there's a lighthouse project where the community can come together, and there's some way of, again, deciding like what happens to the money that everybody contributing thinks is fair, then great, I'm all for it. But I'm personally not going to try to make that happen. I'm busy. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I guess. Right. I mean, you just referred to the app I wrote for this exact purpose, right? So, I don't totally agree actually with Gavin in this matter. So I wrote Lighthouse, which is this peer-to-peer Bitcoin-based crowdfunding app, so you can crowdfund on the blockchain effectively. And the reason I did that is I want to experiment with crowdfunding as a way to fund decentralized infrastructure. And I have a website. If you download Lighthouse, then it will send you to this website, which is a big list of ideas for stuff we could do. along with estimated costs. And there's like an FAQ on the site where I describe why it works this way and so on. And actually, it turns out that on Reddit today, one of the top stories on Reddit today is that one of these ideas I put up called Hourglass just attracted enough promises to pay for the design document. So not the actual app itself, but the design of the app, right? Like a detailed design document. And that's fair enough, because I set the prices fairly high because I'm an expensive guy. But also, some of this work could be subcontracted and so on. So I think that's where we should start experimenting with this, is like not necessarily Bitcoin core development, but apps built on top of Bitcoin. There are a few things on the website where there are projects to do Bitcoin core development. The really hard part about that is it's impossible to get clear decision making out of Bitcoin core. I'm sorry, Gavin, but this is true. Like if you accept money to do an upgrade to Bitcoin core, there's no guarantee that the code will be accepted. And you cannot like go to anyone and ask, right? You can't say, if I write this code, will it be accepted? Because there's no hierarchical decision making process there. And I actually disagree. I would actually like to see there be less consensus in Bitcoin development and more authoritarianism. So that will annoy lots of people. Maybe that will end up on Reddit. But if you look at projects like the Linux kernel, it's been very successful and it has a clear decision maker, right, in Linus. If you look at projects like the current versions of GNOME and KDE, where they don't really have any clear decision makers, they're sort of drifting, and there's a lot of like churn, and code is being written, but it's not necessarily getting better. So I'm sort of a fan of having this sort of clear hierarchy. So I think the answer is yes, we can sort of have funding of this stuff without middlemen. The place to start is not Bitcoin Core, and it's not necessarily fundamental, it's just the way the project is being run. Is that sort of what you expected to hear? Okay.
I just think that there are a lot of people who think Bitcoin within the community would like to support it, but somehow the noise around the foundation means they hold back from supporting something they could support, and that's sort of like perhaps splitting the foundation would work.
Yeah, I think we should experiment with every model. I mean, I think we need like a solid, predictable funding stream for Gavin and Vladimir and these guys. Like they can't have their salaries paid by crowdfunding today, but like very small, self-contained tasks that don't have any approvers. There's no approval path for that. That's where we can experiment with this stuff.
So the question was about, there's lots of discussion right now about anonymous blockchains like Bitcoin. I would say pseudonymous. Chains like Bitcoin, and kind of private chains or chains where kind of the participants are known, or at the very least the miners are known. I think there is an interesting design space here. Yesterday I had a slide talking about the Zen of Bitcoin, which is decentralized, anybody can participate. There are no privileged nodes in the system. If you want to be a miner, you can be a miner. If you want to submit transactions to the network, you can submit transactions, just like the internet is. If you want to run a web server, you can run a web server. If you want to download web pages, you can download web pages. There's no gatekeeper. In the financial world, there's a lot of desire for gatekeepers, and there's a lot of interest in maybe using blockchain technology to kind of make the existing payment rails more efficient. And so you see projects like Ripple or Stellar have the idea of private blockchains. As a technology person, I always think of the technology like what problem you're trying to solve. So in the case of like banks sending money across the world, we have these payment networks like SWIFT that they're all using, that there are all these central organizations that I think the banks would like to get rid of, cut out the middlemen, be more efficient, not have to rely on them. And so the idea of them having some payment network that they control directly, I could see how that would be appealing to them. I don't know that the blockchain matters in that case. As a technology person, I think, why don't they just use MySQL, exactly, with sharded database, with audited logs where every transaction is signed by the identity of the person submitting that transaction. And if you decide to be evil and try to steal some money, well, your signature's right there. So we know who did it. We know all the participants in the system. So they go to jail, right? I mean, I'm not sure that the blockchain makes sense for that use case. I think sidechains are very interesting in some use cases. My use case for a sidechain is actually an exchange that wants to be transparent about all of the trades that are happening, to prove that like they're not front running, or they're not they're not doing all these evil things that exchanges can do because they control everybody's money. But they just want this log that anybody can look at. It's kind of a real-time, very high frequency ledger. And it may make sense to use a sidechain for that. I mean, again, you could probably use maybe you could just run a MySQL database and just make it public. Oracle, whatever your favorite database technology is. So I think you have to carefully look at kind of what problem are you trying to solve, and is a blockchain the right technology to solve it? And I think in a lot of cases the answer is no, but I mean, to put my standard disclaimer on it, I don't think deeply about kind of those use cases, right? I tend to keep focused on Bitcoin and this payment network where we want anybody in the world to be able to pay anybody else in the world. And that's a very different problem than I think Ripple or these other systems are trying to solve. I don't know if you have thoughts, Mike. So the two questions. One was about scaling up the block size, and will that make there be many fewer people doing full validation of the blockchain? Won't it drive people to lightweight wallets, lightweight clients? And the second question was about kind of mining in China and the seemingly built-in advantages they have of cheap electricity and willingness to mine to kind of get some value that's not Chinese currency. So for the block size, I wrote a blog post called a Scalability Roadmap on the Foundation blog, where I talk about kind of the what we need to do to get to bigger blocks and not disincentivize people from running full nodes. And the engineering is pretty straightforward, and some of the engineering is actually happening like now. There's a pull request in to prune the blockchain so that you don't have to store all, 30 gigabytes of historical data. And you talk about the difference between the blockchain and the ledger, right? So the current ledger, which is what you need to validate, is under a gigabyte. And in this age of, gigabytes of memory on our phones, that's not a big deal to keep that data up to date. You don't have to keep track of all of the historical data. The code was implemented that way because that was the most straightforward way to implement it. And we are optimizing that, and that will continue to be optimized, and I don't think that will be an issue. Eventually what the issue will be is just the bandwidth. How much bandwidth you need for the volume of transactions that are being generated on the network. That's the limiting factor. And I think will continue to be the limiting factor unless there's some huge breakthrough in networking technology. Mining in China, I actually don't know nothing about. I don't know what's going on there. I do know that the big price run up to 1,000 seemed to be driven by the Chinese exchanges. So something was happening there. I don't know if it was all miners. I don't know if it was ordinary people. It seemed like the big drop was when China kind of came out and said, we don't want our banks dealing with Bitcoin. That seemed to kind of start the big drawback we've seen in price. But again, I'm not an expert in any of that. I don't think we had a discussion yesterday about mining centralization, and I still believe that mining centralization and decentralization is going to go in waves. I still think somebody's going to invent a really cool Bitcoin mining hot water heater, or electric blanket, or space heater, or coffee warmer, and then, we're all Bitcoin mining a little bit, because why not, right? We want our nice, warm cup of tea to stay warm. And I think we will see that kind of thing happening. Why not? We all have wireless everywhere. You just plug it into a power source. It generates a little bit of heat, generates a little Bitcoins, and we're happy. And it's very decentralized because it's happening all over the world. I mean, I think of it in the same way as like computing has gone in waves of centralization, decentralization. There used to be mainframes. went to personal computers. Now it's computers in our pocket that are kind of combination of centralized and decentralized, because every time you use Google, you're actually sending data up to some huge data center and who knows where. I think that will continue, and I think Bitcoin mining will be the same way, frankly. I don't think all the Bitcoin miners will be in China. They'll be in Iceland, maybe. Or maybe they'll be in outer space, actually. We were talking about that, right? If you really want to find a place that's nice and cold and has lots of solar power, space is a good place to put it. And that's pretty decentralized, right? There's a lot of space. So, maybe that'd be better.
Yeah, it was right. It was full validation and China, right? Yeah, with respect to China, that's almost, I think, a self-solving problem, right? I agree there are probably people trying to use it to evade capital controls. If they are very successful, there'll be a crackdown on that, right? I mean, you can't hide a mining operation at the scale they're doing it, right? The authorities there have already banned port 8333. They have very good internet inspection tools, right? They can find miners if they really care. And if these guys are actually moving significant value out of the country, then they will care. We'll see. So maybe Art will be right and it will end up in Iceland, or maybe you'll be right and it will end up in China. I hope one day we can abandon proof of work. Like, it's kind of a stupid system if you think about it, right? Like, it's an approximation of one man, one vote, effectively, but it's a very rough approximation. Nowadays, it's barely an approximation at all, right? It's just something that happens to work. So there will eventually be something better, and we'll have to wait and see what that is. Full validation, not that many people are doing it today, but I think largely that's partly because Bitcoin Core has a kind of geeky user interface. A lot of other wallets have surpassed it in terms of visual design and ease of use and so on. And it's not that people are choosing lightweight validation, it's more that they're choosing like wallets for other reasons. So if you built a wallet that could switch between lightweight validation and full validation while keeping the nice user interface, and then you just have a bit of code. Originally I remember, like, when we were first working on this stuff, we really thought Bitcoin Core will be the wallet everyone uses, and it will be SPV and full validation, and it will like intelligently switch between these modes. If it detects that you leave your computer on all the time, it will automatically upgrade itself to be full validation. And that never happened, but it still could. Right, we could write code that does this kind of thing, maybe with other wallets. So, yeah, if people really care, then the code will get written. But the problem is, practically today, SPV validation and even just a trusted third party is like nearly as good as full validation, right? I've yet to encounter anyone who got defrauded because they used a lighter validation mode. We know it must happen eventually, but it's not a common problem, so it's not a high priority. Can I just say one thing before I pass to Gavin? It's really a question for Gavin, I know. When the foundation was created, it's worth remembering the context when it was created, right? At the time, there was just a bunch of geeks on mailing lists, and suddenly when Bitcoin hit the news for the first time, we were getting like journalists and politicians and regulators saying like, who is the CEO of Bitcoin, Like, who do we talk to? Where can we go to get information on this? And there was nothing, right? There was like the Bitcoin development mailing list. So the foundation, flawed though it has been, met a need at the time it was created, and I don't think it's right to say the only good thing it's done has paid developers and organized developer events, right? It like, we had Jinyong to take at the start. Me and Gavin were like talking to journalists all the time because there was no one else to do it, and we got like proper press people and that Patrick, who was able to spend a lot of time in Washington and basically prevented Bitcoin being banned, right? And he was able to do that because of the foundation. So. I disagree with your comment about it being mostly about developers. I think that's rewriting history a little bit. But
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what I say is, you may not have needed the foundation, but I certainly needed the foundation because other.
I never said I didn't need it. I said everyone's concentrating on paying the core developers, but not on these developer events, which I think are extremely valuable.
I agree the developer events are valuable. I don't know whether the foundation's going to continue. If you think it should, then talk to Bruce Fenton, the new executive director, and any of the other members of the board of the foundation, and encourage them to continue them. Let them know how much you appreciate it. And if you have a business, sponsor them, because frankly, that's what it takes. It takes somebody to pony up the money to make them happen. So the question is, should the foundation use its social weight to attract new developers? To
Now all its energy into attracting developers to this space.
when you say this space, you mean the just Bitcoin development in general?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. What do you,
Some of these questions can't be answered yet because it's yet to see whether we have consensus.
I don't know if you can push developers. I mean that doesn't seem to the way we think. Right? I mean, you can't really advertise to us and say, you know, this cool shiny thing, right? If it is like cats and, you know, shiny objects that catch our attention. We certainly, I mean, yeah, educational resources and all of that kind of stuff. Although I don't know how effective the foundation has been at all that. I think like the you know, Bitcoin.org kind of open source community has done a pretty good job of, you know, developer documentation. Yeah, and I mean the foundation sponsored, right, Bitcoin.org and the work to create a functioning website there. That's another great thing I think that the foundation did that's underappreciated is, you know, trying to leverage people to do great things. But yeah, I mean, I don't. If you have like a specific plan of like what that would look like I think, you know, like sponsoring more dev cores, that's a clear plan. It's certainly something that could happen.
There are
but-
things like Google Summer of Code, which is a great inspiration for students at universities who need internships to bolster up their CVs. And basically, Google Summer of Code is basically it's a Google recruiting effort, but it's quid pro quo. The people that go on those things get their name on somebody, they get to be seen,
Yep.
and they get an introduction. And there's no reason why Bitcoin Foundation couldn't run Bitcoin Summer.
Yeah, I've actually been a Google Summer of Code mentor like 10 years ago, before Bitcoin existed. Google has lots and lots of money and the foundation is broke, so that's not going to happen. Right, just to put it bluntly, to go back to the original question, you know, Bitcoin is already very attractive to developers. We've got lots and lots of developers. I don't think that's our problem. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can make developers more productive in the Bitcoin space, right? Because what we have right now is a lot of developers that are spinning their wheels. They make prototypes that are not really usable. They duplicate each other's efforts a lot. They don't necessarily know how to get started. So, you know, I spend a lot of my time on like documentation and, you know, trying to clear the path for developers to show, like, you know, figure out solutions to problems that other people can copy. I think that's probably more useful right now than attempting to just increase the number of people, because it seems like every idea in the Bitcoin space has like at least 3 startups working on it right now. But how many of those will actually launch usable products? Not so clear.
I have comments on that. Both sides of everything.
Yeah, question is, well, I don't know. How do you get consensus? Why are we still arguing about the block size limit after so many years?
I mean, yeah, a lot of people are pushing me to be more of a dictator. Like Mike. And that,
Why not rename it instead of dictator, just, you know, traffic cop or something, but, you know, like, kind of decision maker rather than dictator.
icebreaker. I mean, that may be what has to happen with the block size, frankly. I may just have to throw my weight around and say, this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't like it, find another project.
We've got consensus.
This,
Gavin,
and frankly, you know, that's what happened with the multisig P2SH thing, right? I just kind of said, I've listened to everybody. You know, we have a couple proposals. This is the way it's going to be. And
we have a vote.
So the question is about forks that don't have consensus on the blockchain. So, you know, I don't think that's a realistic threat. There's so much incentive to go with whatever the majority is. So much economic incentive for miners, so much incentive for anybody running a Bitcoin business. I think given a rough consensus and a clear, like, this is the way it's going to be, and these are the large players who are going to go with this. I've spent a lot of time talking to large players over the last few months. That we will have consensus very quickly. I mean, there may be, you know, I had no idea that this even happened, but somebody told me that at the first 50 to 25 subsidy halving, that there was some crazy set of people who thought decreasing the subsidy was a bad idea, and they're just going to keep going with 50 Bitcoin blocks. I had no idea that there was like a faction that was even doing that, and I believe that they decided to give up very, very, very quickly because it was obvious that, you know, having, you know, this perpetual 50 Bitcoin blockchain was useless because nobody else was going along with them. And I think the similar thing would happen with the block size. And the great thing about the block size actually is, like, all these SPV clients will just work. You don't have to, like, they don't care how big blocks are already because they're not downloading full blocks. So that makes it a lot easier.
Given the whole thing of Bitcoin 2.0, people saying you should build it on Bitcoin, everyone's going to have their own blockchain. What is the future of Bitcoin as you guys see it coming from 2010 until today?
What is the future of Bitcoin?
Given
Everything we've seen so far?
Given what you guys know, being in the positions that you are, having exposure to things that most other people perhaps don't have, how do you see this stuff going forward?
Based on our secret Illuminati.
I left my crystal ball back at the States. I knew I should have brought that thing. I mean, I've always said that I see Bitcoin as a long-term project.
Give us some interesting stuff.
Be less boring! Be less boring, Gavin!
No soft pedaling. I've only had half a beer. I don't think I can.
How do you see it going forward? This is your life. How do you see it
I still think there's a small possibility that Bitcoin could become the world's reserve currency in 20, 30 years. I think that's a small possibility. I don't think that's likely. I think in 20, 30 years, it's much more likely that Bitcoin's a pretty mainstream method on the internet. I can completely see that happening. I don't think it's like 100% possibility, but I think it's, you know, at this point, 50%, 60%, that it could be that mainstream that just people use Bitcoin on the internet, that's what they use. Needs to what? Stand up in a court of law? I think...
Well, you know, the Bitcoin logo is orange, right? So I think the future's bright and the future's orange. Right, okay, you want something serious. I think, I hope there will never be a Bitcoin 2.0. So conventionally in software, if you do a 2.0, it means it's incompatible with 1.0. It's a different product, actually. And I think we'll get up to like Bitcoin 1.100 or something, but, you know, I would like to see, I think there are countries where the currency is clearly about to explode. Greece is probably very, very likely to be next, but that's not the only one. And probably Bitcoin is a bit too young to have any real impact in a place like Greece. It's too soon for us to make any impact there. But, you know, 10 years from now, I'd be very surprised if Greece is the last country that hits this kind of problem. And what I would like to see is a more strategic approach in the Bitcoin community to saying, like, maybe we need really, like, Greek translations of all of our apps right now. Right, and a Greek translation of the website and some kind of effort on the ground. You know, some Latin American countries, some people say the dollar, I don't know about that, but...
The
The dollar will be okay, I think. But I would like to, I'm hoping that at some point Bitcoin can take off in a country, not only on the internet, but like for person-to-person payments too, in a big way. But probably not like unless there's a crisis first, because for something like money, it takes a big push for people to change how they do things. I'm not hoping for a crisis, but I think like they're going to happen anyway. So, yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about people moving across to SPV validation clients, and with block size potentially increasing soon and the blockchain growing ever more enormous, it becomes increasingly difficult to run a full node client, which of course the SPV clients require to connect to get their validation done. I perceive that there's a danger going forward that there are not going to be enough full nodes available to effectively service all of those SPV clients without some kind of incentivization for running a complete full blockchain node. What is being done to address that problem?
Nothing. Is your question actually? Sorry, the question was. Let me repeat. The question was: are we going to run out of SPV serving capacity on the network? And if so, what is being done about it? Right, so the answer is nothing is being done about it. Really, there's only two people in the world who implement SPV wallets, and that's me and Aaron of Voicing. Me and my team of merry pirates, right? And we all work on Bitcoin J together. So it's not just me, but those are the two projects that do SPV. And neither of us are working on stuff that's related to that, because there aren't, we don't have time. There aren't enough of us. We don't even know how much capacity there is on the network, right? So when I worked at Google every day, I would come in and the first thing I'd do in the morning is look at four widescreen monitors full of graphs. Bitcoin is the opposite of that. There are no graphs. So we have a really dire situation with regards to like monitoring and metrics. We don't even know how close we are to hitting the limit there. My gut sense is that we have plenty of capacity right now, I think, but I don't know that. So the first step is to find out like how soon we're going to die. And then the next step would be, there's lots of, this code was written by Matt Corallo during his lectures in 2012, because his lectures were boring. We've never optimized that code since. So, not surprisingly, right, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit where we can increase capacity just by writing better code and smarter code. And if we hit problems, we will do that. Luckily, most SPV wallets are based on Bitcoin J, which also, thanks again to Matt Corallo and me. I got Matt Corallo as an intern at Google, and we worked on micropayments together. So we have an implementation of micropayment channels in the main SPV implementation. So if we needed to, wallets could pay nodes to serve them. I hope that will never be necessary, because that's a big step up in complexity. And you have to explain to users why their balance is going down and things. But if we needed to, we could go there, in theory. But I hope we don't.
I don't think we'll ever need to go there, because miners want the network to work. They have an incentive to make sure the network works. And so if there was ever a problem, I would go to the miners and say, hey, you guys need to double the number of full nodes you're running. Just do it, because otherwise, exchange rate's going to go down, usage is going to go down, all that mining equipment you invested in is going to be worthless. And so that's the easy kind of economic incentive answer. And then we have all this, as Mike said, right? Those kind of engineering problems don't worry me so much, right? There are all sorts of smart engineers in the world that optimize things, including Mike and me. So.
Yeah, one last point. At some point, the technique we use for SPV wallets will stop scaling, and it'll have to be rewritten from scratch. I'm mentally preparing myself for that day, but I don't want to think about it.
Okay, guys, we're having two more questions, and then we can move into the bar and continue the conversation. One at the back there.
Hi, Gavin. I'd like to know, if you had the freedom to change Bitcoin at your will, what features would you introduce, and would it not look more like a Dash by that time?
If you were a dictator, hint, hint.
The question was, if I had free reign to change Bitcoin willy-nilly, with no impact on everything that's been deployed so far, what would I change? What would it look like? What features would I like to see? Dash is the renamed dark Bitcoin. Is that right? Yeah, I have a list. So transaction IDs are computed incorrectly. I would fix that. So you don't have this stupid script sig in the transaction ID. That gets rid of a bunch of malleability issues and would make, you know, all these contract things that people are thinking about smarter. Yeah, I mean, that's easy. Instead of using ECDSA, I'd use Schnorr because the signatures are smaller and you get multi-sig for free, basically. What else would I change about Bitcoin? Oh, no maximum block size. I think Satoshi made a mistake putting in that 1 megabyte limit when he did. I don't think that was necessary, and I think it's just causing nothing but political headaches for years, as somebody pointed out. I don't know enough about Dash and whether its privacy model really works. I don't think anybody really does. I would guess it hasn't actually been attacked by researchers who know a whole bunch about privacy. The thing I always say about attacking the system is until you have something like the Silk Road, which is worth attacking because there's a whole bunch of value being exchanged there that, you know, somebody has an interest in either stealing or taking down. I don't think you know if you're secure. And so, you know, we're very conservative in Bitcoin Core about, you know, letting there be proper review of everything we do and trying to, you know, make sure that we're not advertising anonymity when we're not anonymous, or we're not advertising privacy when we're not actually private. So we're pretty conservative that way. So I don't know if there's anything I would take from that project. You know, maybe if the privacy researchers come back to me and say, yeah, we've looked at this and it looks really solid and you should do it, then, you know, I'd change my tune. There's also, you know, like things in the like low-level scripting that I'd really like to have. Maybe we could get that with a hard fork at some point.
So on an interesting point of governance, have you guys seen what the Counterparty Foundation is doing right now? They're having an election right now where people get to vote with a stake in the coin. So, and they're electing community directors. So in Bitcoin, what that would look like is people take the coin they own, use the private key of their addresses, sign a vote, and say, I give whatever 10 of my Bitcoin votes to you, Gavin, and you kind of see who the community wants as their leadership. You don't have to elect one person, but I'm sure if we did this.
So I'm hearing the question is, do we want the exchanges to have huge votes on what happens in?
But I'm sure in the end you would be like the George Washington who would let you for generations to come. It might get its way that you have to vote.
So the real question was about counterparty, and they're doing some sort of proof of stake votings. I mean, so many people delegate their coins to other people, and like it was something like I think multisig is like I saw like 8% of Bitcoins are now protected by multisig addresses, which if you think about voting, how does that work, right? So I have a vote, but some other semi-custodian of my coins has it. So I don't think it works for Bitcoin, at least. I think there are too many issues there to make that work. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Mike.
Yeah, this probably will get me in trouble on Reddit again. Like, I don't want people to vote on the future of Bitcoin, right? Like, I, for one, answer to myself, basically. I'm not gonna, if someone has a vote and is like, you should work on this, then I will ignore them and work on what I think is most important, right? Like, end of story. Yeah, that's the way it works, right? You know, someone can vote that I jump off a cliff, and I'm not gonna do it. So, I think the right way of voting in Bitcoin is people fork the software, and if necessary, they vote through a hard fork of the chain, right? And then we see which side gets the most, the economic majority on it. I don't think you want like some foundation to be collecting votes through proof of stake or whatever, because like who's going to do the work, right? If you've got a hard fork in the chain, it means someone has already done the work, and there's actual value on the line. It's not just people clicking a button in some voting app because they can, you know. So I think that's a better way of doing it.
I would also add that I think there's a very, very big difference between technical understanding and having money.
Yeah, right. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're not stupid, right? Yeah, right. You're right. I mean, a lot of these issues that we debate all the time, like block size and stuff, they're actually incredibly trivial. Most people wouldn't want to vote anyway, even if they have lots of money. Like, you know, they're only of interest to geeks and engineers who work on the system every day.